Hey, I'm Stephanie, and it's time to talk Under Eye Correctors. This video is going to be a hybrid review and declutter, in which we will first very briefly discuss exactly what Under Eye Correctors are and how to use them, and then we will dive into the pros and cons of different color correctors from drugstore to high-end. And I'm happy to say that I think all of them have something to offer, even if they're not all for me. As always, I use timestamps, so feel free to hop, skip, and jump to whatever's most relevant for you. If you've been following my recent maximalist makeup declutter series, this video is part of that, but it's going to look a little bit different because, well, technical issues. I was actually planning to review all of these color correctors at the end of last year. I even recorded the whole review, and then I proceeded to give away several of the color correctors because I didn't need all of them. But when I went to edit that video, I realized a bunch of the footage was corrupt and completely unusable. Luckily, I still have my notes and a bunch of the swatch footage and wear footage, and I do still have several of the correctors to this day. And since I'm currently in the process of overhauling my entire makeup collection, I'll link the playlist in case you'd like to watch that, I figured now would be the perfect time to finally complete this review. So we're going to compare color and consistency, finish and formula, and in the end, we'll do a declutter. First of all, what is the difference between concealer and under eye corrector? The main difference is who needs it. Concealer is useful for most people, but under eye corrector is really only useful if you have dark circles or discoloration under your eyes. A whole lot of people can get away with just wearing concealer, so if you don't deal with dark circles or under eye discoloration, you can feel free to click out of this video now and just frolic the interwebs with your bright, beautiful under eyes. Can you tell I'm jealous? But if you want to make me feel better, of course you can stay and watch the whole video. Then there are people like me. For some reason, our under eyes seem to attract the darkness of the human condition, casting dark shadows. And if we try to cover that darkness with concealer alone, it can often not be enough and kind of leave a gray cast. In this clip, I'm wearing corrector plus concealer on one side and only concealer on the other. As I move my head around, especially when I look down, you can see how the side with only concealer appears a bit gray at some angles, while the side primed with corrector has a bit more warmth. To make the brightening effect more even, I had to use 3 times as much concealer as I did on the side that was primed with corrector. That is why color correctors exist. They're based on things like color theory and the color wheel, and we're not going to get into all of that today. We're going to keep it simple and just say that most people with dark under eye circles can cancel out that color using a shade of orange or red. Because I have a light skin tone, orange or red would be way too dark for me, so I would use a shade of peach or pink to correct the darkness under my eyes. When the dark color of my blue under eye circles is filtered through that more peachy color, the end result is a brightened, more neutral color. And that is much easier to cover up with concealer than the original darkness would have been. Ideally, you can then use one thin layer of corrector and one thin layer of concealer, and that will be more effective than one thick layer of concealer would have been on its own. And since under eye skin is so thin, the less product we use, the better, because it looks more natural. These are the ones I tested, and as you can see, they run the gamut from drugstore products to high-end cosmetics. Before reviewing all these goodies, context is important, especially when it comes to complexion products. So here are some swatches to start with. All swatch and wear footage is recorded in natural daylight with no filters. Feel free to come back to this section of the video if you need to compare colors or finishes. But skin type also plays a large role in our complexion choices. So I have oily combination skin. I get extremely oily in my T-zone and yet still manage to have very dry under eye skin. And as I age, my skin there is becoming thinner, more textured, and less resilient. So more forgiving formulas are playing a larger role in my tastes nowadays. Now it's time to get into the nitty-gritty of the individual products. And if you see me looking over here, that's just because that's where my notes are. But I promise, I'm still focused on you. Our first contender is from the drugstore, and it is the Girl Pro Concealer in the shade Peach Corrector. This one wasn't made for me. The color was too dark to be brightening under my eyes, but I can still tell you about the consistency and coverage. This had medium coverage and got rid of about 65% of the blue under my eyes. The reason this was too dark for me is because not only do I have deep set eyes, but I also have hollows underneath my eyes, which means I personally really benefit from a brightening shade. So if you have light skin, but you don't don't need something that's brightening, this could potentially be an option for you because it does cancel out the darkness under your eyes, but I do think that a slightly brighter shade would be best for most people with my skin tone. I am a little bit disappointed that this color wasn't ideal for me, mostly because the formula was pretty nice. It has a very lightweight and I would say a natural matte finish. It's not too matte, but it's not too luminous. And I think that quality is really good for someone with my facial structure. Because I do have those hollows under the eyes, a product that's too dewy does have the potential to emphasize the topography of that area, if you know what I mean. In other words, that line between where the fullness of my cheek meets the thinner skin under my eye. But despite being matte, it wasn't too matte for my dry, thin under eye skin. It didn't appear dry or really emphasize my fine lines. So had the color been better, I think I would have really enjoyed this LA Girl Pro Conceal. Now on to the Kokie Be Bright Illuminating Concealer in the shade Peach. I was really looking forward to trying this one because I've heard so many people rave about this formula and it's at a low price point. So I had very high hopes. Unfortunately, they were dashed almost immediately. The color of this one was also a little too dark for me. So even though it blended out evenly and gave me good coverage to cancel out the blue under my eyes, unfortunately, it also darkened that area, which just isn't ideal for my face structure. But the shade doesn't necessarily make it a bad product. It's just a bad fit for me. But it wasn't a good fit for me formula-wise either. Although it had a matte finish, and as I mentioned earlier, I do enjoy a good matte finish underneath my eyes, this went a little bit too far and it ended up looking dry, emphasizing my fine lines and texture. And it's funny because it's called an illuminating concealer and it definitely in the swatches looks more luminous than the matte LA Girl concealer. And yet on my under eye, it didn't translate that way. It ended up looking really dry, whereas the other more matte concealer looked somehow better. So it just goes to show you swatches don't always tell the whole story. So although the Kokie Be Bright Illuminating Concealer offers great coverage, I don't think that the peach color is a great option for people with my skin tone or my skin type. But the drugstore also had some better color matches to offer me. For example, the Milani Supercharged Brightening Under Eye Tint in the shade 120 Peach. According to my notes, this one was much lighter and less saturated, meaning that the peachy color wasn't as intense. Now, normally, that is exactly what I am looking for in my cosmetics, as close to beige as possible. But I'm not sure that's ideal in a color corrector because that bluish purple tint under my eyes can get pretty intense and saturated, meaning that it also needs an intense, more saturated color to cancel it out. In essence, I found that this corrector was very lightweight and easy to blend, but not powerful enough for my needs. In other words, it just didn't give me enough coverage. Although the depth of the shade was more appropriate for my skin tone, the saturation level just wasn't intense enough to cancel out the darkness underneath my eyes. And so it ultimately functioned more like a slightly corrective, very light coverage concealer. But the formula itself was great. The finish was natural, the coverage and consistency were light, so if you only have slight under eye darkness to correct, this might actually be a great match for you. Unfortunately, the Milani Supercharged Brightening Under Eye Tint just wasn't the perfect match for me. But my drugstore hopes weren't dashed yet because Milani makes yet another corrector called the Conceal and Perfect Under Eye Brightener, and I have it in the shade 2 Melon. And this corrector has many of the same qualities of the Milani Supercharged corrector we just discussed. In fact, they are incredibly similar. Just like the other Milani corrector, this Conceal and Perfect Under Eye Brightener is also a light, unsaturated peach color, which ultimately functions more like a hybrid concealer corrector, at least for me. And it also has a very light coverage. There are two major differences between these two correctors. The first one is in the packaging. The supercharged corrector comes in a squeezy tube, which I generally find more practical and much more sanitary, whereas the Conceal and Perfect wand has an application puff on the end. I am just not a fan of that. It's messy and it feels kind of gross because no matter what I do, I cannot keep it clean. But the two Milani correctors also differ in their finish. The supercharged version is a more natural finish, whereas the Conceal and Perfect has quite a luminous finish. And I don't always like that because it can potentially emphasize that line between my under eye hollow and my cheek pudge. But in this case, I think it's actually done really well. It looks nice and it doesn't seem to emphasize that line so much. Maybe it's because it's so very lightweight. On winter days when my skin was looking especially dry, this formula managed to really perk up that area of my face. So although this corrector isn't ideal for me because it doesn't offer me enough coverage, it is very nice and I found ways to use it. So if you are looking for just a little bit of coverage, a little bit of brightening, and you'd really like to kind of wake up your tired under eyes, make them look more hydrated, the Milani Conceal and Perfect Under Eye Brightener might actually be a great option for you. Now we're moving up in price point to discuss the Clinique All Over Primer and Color Corrector in the shade Brightening Peach. According to my notes, this was the first liquid corrector out of the bunch that was a good color for me. Not too light, not too dark, but still saturated enough to make a difference on my under eye circles. And the formula is easy to blend, giving me a natural finish. The consistency is a little bit heavier than both of the Milani correctors, but it also offers more coverage. Unfortunately, it still wasn't enough coverage for my dark under eye circles. And I also felt like the formula wasn't quite hydrating enough for my very dry under eyes. So if you feel like the Milani correctors might not offer you enough brightening or coverage, the Clinique All Over Concealer might be a good option for you, especially if you don't struggle with really dry skin under your eyes. So now it's time to pull out the big guns, cream correctors. And the reason I call them the big guns is because cream or potted concealers and correctors can oftentimes offer more coverage. And the Pixi by Petra Correction Concentrate in the shade Brightening Peach fits that category. Although I do have to say that the shade name Brightening Peach did kind of throw me for a loop because when I look at it, it seems like more of a salmon pink. Maybe the Pixi marketing team just thought that putting salmon in the shade name wouldn't be the wisest marketing choice. And they're probably right because the idea of slathering salmon on my face isn't really that attractive. But I mean, they could have named it something pink. I mean, even if they had named it something pink, that name would have been more accurate. But I digress. According to my notes, the formula of the Pixi corrector, although initially a bit stiff, blends easily once it warms up to skin temperature and it leaves a satin finish. So when applied with a finger, it blends very easily. Even though the formula is slightly stiff, that consistency also means that it will stay put and has less of a tendency to crease. In fact, I can often get away without using a powder to set it. Does that mean it's crease proof? No, but I do find that on low stakes, no makeup days, the creasing was never enough to bother me. So that stiffness isn't necessarily a downside. And when it comes to the color, I find the shade isn't very brightening on me, but it doesn't darken my under eyes either. So if I'm looking for a color to simply cancel out the blue under my eyes, and I want to avoid any unnatural brightening effect, the Pixi is a good choice, both underneath makeup and with no concealer over it. The finish I found to be was very natural, and so all in all, I found the Pixi corrector to be a great option. But if I want brightening, that's when I would reach for the Tarte Colored Clay CC Under Eye Corrector in the shade Light Medium Peach. The shade is a bit brighter and the formula is more luminous, offering me brightening both in color and in finish. The formula of this product is quite emollient, so on days when my under eyes are looking particularly parched or tired, this formula does have the potential to perk them up a bit. But as lovely as that luminosity is, it can also potentially emphasize the hollows underneath my eyes. So I do like to use a setting powder when I use this, and that often takes the luminosity down just enough. Although the emollients of this formula does lend it a certain weight, I do find that it's very easy to blend out and it doesn't look heavy on the skin at all. The coverage of this is great, but the peach color isn't quite as saturated as I would like. However, the formula of this made it my favorite color corrector for years, until it was recently dethroned. So what is now my favorite color corrector? The Charlotte Tilbury Magic Vanish Color Corrector in shade 2. I feel like this perfectly merges the Tarte and the Pixi color correctors. It's like my perfect Goldilocks color corrector. It's not too peachy, not too pink, not too shiny, not too matte, not too emollient, not too stiff. It's just right. The color is exactly what the doctor ordered, a light yet saturated peach. On days where I'm going for a natural look, I can wear this under my eyes on its own with no other complexion products, and it helps me look more awake. But if I wear this under concealer, it brightens just enough to look natural. I can apply this with a finger, a brush, a sponge. It always looks smooth and lightweight under my eyes. So as far as I'm concerned, this one takes the cake. It is my absolute favorite. Before we move on to the Declutter, I wanted to briefly mention the cult classic corrector from BECCA, which is now being made by Smashbox. I also tested that one last year, but the swatch footage is in a slightly different format, so I just thought I would give it an honorable mention slot. Basically, I can see why people like it. The consistency is very easy to work with. It has a slight stiffness to it like the Pixi does, but the formula is a little bit thinner, so it's easier to apply with a brush. I had the lightest pink shade, which was a little bit too light and too pink for me, so it just wasn't the right color, but I can imagine that it would work beautifully for a lot of people. The finish is kind of sparkly, but not glittery. It's the sort of thing you might only be able to understand if you've ever actually swatched it yourself, but basically I feel like there are the teeniest, tiniest, almost microscopic mica particles evenly suspended throughout the formula, and they kind of melt into the skin. They're so small. I originally felt like that formula was just too glittery looking under my eyes, so I didn't really like it at first, but I have to admit it grew on me. I kind of liked that fairy-like luminosity under my eyes. I ultimately decluttered it because it just wasn't the right color for me, but also I feel like the finish of the Charlotte Tilbury corrector is just more flattering on my eye shape. However, if you don't deal with under eye hollows and you enjoy a luminous finish and you can find the right color, I do think it's a good option. I mean, it's a classic for a reason. I feel like this is the perfect segue into the declutter. So first, I'll let you know what I've already given away, and then we'll switch to the overhead camera for a more traditional declutter moment. When it came to the liquid correctors, I obviously gave away the Kokie Be Bright Illuminating Concealer because both the color and the formula simply were not made for me. As for the Milani correctors, although they were both really nice, they were so similar there was no need to keep both of them, especially since they don't offer the coverage I was looking for. I gave away the supercharged brightening under eye tint because of the more sanitary packaging. I just felt more comfortable giving that to someone else. Because there's just no way to clean the Conceal and Perfect Under Eye Brightener, I decided to keep that one. I kept the LA Girl Pro Peach Corrector for the same reason. I just couldn't sanitize the packaging. So I thought I would try to get use out of it myself. I also kept the Clinique All Over Primer and Color Corrector, but to be honest, I kind of just kept it as a default reaction because I didn't really have strong feelings for it either way. Then came the potted correctors. I had 2 with a more luminous finish and 2 with a more natural finish, and so I figured I would just keep the best one from each category. The 2 shinier correctors were the BECCA or Smashbox Halo Under Eye Brightening Corrector in shade 1 and the Tarte Colored Clay CC Under Eye Corrector in the shade Light Medium. That was an easy decision since the BECCA version was simply the wrong color for me, so I decluttered that one and kept the Tarte corrector. The 2 cream correctors with the more natural finish were the Pixi by Petra Correction Concentrate in the shade Brightening Peach and the Charlotte Tilbury Magic Vanish Color Corrector in shade 2. Based on color alone, the Charlotte Tilbury corrector was simply a much better match for me, but I also feel like the formula is more versatile and looks smoother under the eye, so as lovely as the Pixi corrector was, I sent it off to a new home where it can get the lurve it deserves, and I kept the Charlotte Tilbury corrector all for myself. The question is, what will I keep now that I'm doing a really hardcore declutter? So here are the remaining color correctors in my collection: Charlotte Tilbury, Tarte, Clinique, LA Girl, and the Milani Under Eye Brightener. I think the easiest way to start this declutter would be to remove the top contender and then maybe the bottom choices that I don't want to keep, and then we'll see what remains. If I could only keep one of these, it would definitely be the Charlotte Tilbury because this has become my #1 most flexible color corrector. So that one is definitely staying. When it comes to the remaining contenders, these two immediately sink to the bottom for me. This Clinique, because the formula is a little bit too heavy for my thinning under eye skin, and this LA Girl Pro Concealer, because the color just isn't quite right for me. Which leaves us with these two. Both of these are contenders for my collection because I do find myself reaching for these on days where I'm looking for something more brightening than this. And I tend to reach for the Tarte Corrector on days where I'm looking for a more full coverage brightened look. And I tend to reach for this on days where I'm not wearing any makeup, except maybe just brows, and I just want to brighten my under eyes a little bit. The thing is, I can also wear this on days where I'm not wearing any other makeup, and this also looks good. The reason I sometimes choose this one is because of its format. This one I usually like to dig into a little bit and then put some on a palette and then work it into a brush and then apply it that way, which takes a little bit more time. And this one, as much as I think the packaging is kind of gross and sloppy looking, it is efficient because I can just directly dab this onto my under eye and go. The question is, do I really need 3 color correctors? I mean, it is the sort of product that I use every single day and I get a lot of use out of, but at the same time, this is also a very utilitarian category for me. It's not like eyeshadows or blushes or lipsticks where I really enjoy variety. I don't need to use a different corrector every day, but because these 3 all do serve different purposes, I feel like it might be worth keeping them. I think what I'm going to do is keep all 3 of these for now because my goal at the moment is to reorganize my makeup collection. That's why I'm doing this whole declutter, because I'm going to use the container concept to organize my makeup in a way that makes it easily accessible and easy to clean, easy to enjoy, so that I can also easily see what I can afford. So if I ever get the itch to buy new makeup, the first thing I can do is just glance right in the drawer of the category I'm looking at and see if I actually have space for something new. And what I think I'm going to do is keep these for now, and then I'm going to see how much space I have for this category of makeup in my final makeup storage solution. And if I have space for all 3 of them, then it's worth keeping because I use them. But if I don't, then these 2 will definitely be on the chopping block again. So the final verdict for today is that I will be keeping these 3 and I will be decluttering these 2. And if you want to see what the final overall makeup collection looks like when I do my final inventory video, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss it. If you're still watching, wow, thank you. I know this was a long one. Maybe you can toss me an eyeball emoji in the comments so I know I'm not just talking to dead air. And then I can send you a heart as a token of my appreciation. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like, comment, subscribe, all that jazz. But even if you don't, I hope you have a great week and we can all remember that even stumbling can be a form of moving forward. So let's stumble in style.